session from TechShare Pro 2022. It's all about two words that are really close to my heart: accessibility and design. And the aim of this session is to put accessibility at the heart of design, and perhaps even design at the heart of accessibility. We have a great panel with us. Joining me in the studio here is Craig Collinson from HSBC, a senior manager in accessibility. And on screen, going clockwise from top left, we have Beatriz Gonzalez-Mellidez, head of accessibility and digital inclusion. And you see from her branding, she is from Atos. We then have Phil Strain, head of product access and design at Miro. We have Katie Dickerson from RNID, who is a service designer, and it feels like coming home when I hear the word service design, because that's where I cut my teeth. And then we have James Nash from Channel 4, who is a UX prototyper. So we will start off with a short presentation from Beatriz. Beatriz, the floor is yours, the screen is yours, the conference at the moment is yours.
Thank you very much, Rama. So I'm going to talk a bit about dark mode. Our slides are in dark mode because we at Atos treat accessibility, exclusion, and inaccessibility like pollution. We ask ourselves, how can we approach accessibility in a sustainable way and do it at scale? Accessibility pioneer Jim Tobias said in 2016 FUNCA Accessibility Days, inaccessibility is kind of like pollution. So the logical extension of this idea is to take frameworks designed to pollution and apply them to accessibility. The logic, sorry, I have heard something on the background. Smog is a well-known type of pollution and a negative externality of the production process. Poor accessibility is also a negative externality of the production and planning processes, and as unnecessary as pollution. But externalities are not all bad. Inclusive design creates many positive externalities. We call this the carb cut effect. Wheelchairs benefit from carb cuts, but so do families with strollers, bikes, and persons with suitcases or shopping carts. Our global accessibility program approach is to deliver a full ecosystem accessibility, following the decarbonization approach, to measure the direct and indirect impact together with influence on supply chain and business ecosystems. I'm going to give you an example of the direct impact on process we own, branding. We bring accessibility, sustainability, and workplace together with our eco-branding. The design elements have been selected to be more sustainable and minimize our carbon impact, keeping accessibility in mind, like changing our font to Railway, which has improved readability, works with 70+ languages, and comes in a reduced file size package. Reducing storage reduces also consumption. Now we have two user interfaces for all of our external documents, an accessible decarbonized dark mode for digital use and a light mode for printing. This is an example of the light mode with white background, and the lights out, we're back to dark mode. The same codes are audited in dark mode, which is our default template for screens. We are aware that dark mode presents accessibility issues for certain people because disability is a complex topic. So the key aspect is that we provide a choice. Any employee can change the template and consume the slides in their preferred mode. The same for web. Default is black backgrounds to make a statement on decarbonization and accessibility, but we always provide a choice on the light. My two pieces of advice for the discussions later when designing for dark mode are these. First, respect the user choice. Second, just do it. Design for dark mode. Don't throw away hierarchy and proximity visual cues by just inverting the colors. Closer elements should be lighter and distant ones should be darker. In Atos, we're changing our culture, and other companies doing the same. We see accessibility as a business and innovation chance. An example of innovation at the workplace in our accessibility as a service offering is our PowerPoint plugin. It's a new ribbon menu item for all employees with the Atos eco branding. This way, we link developments like the eco-branding to digital daily workplace experience, and this at enterprise level. We provide dark and light mode templates with colors, as well as a language switch, which is a key element both for voice synthesis to read in the correct language and accent, and for autocorrection to work properly. If you work in international teams, you have probably experienced what it can get with the language settings. Other accessibility features are leveraged with accessibility standard training, including how to check for accessibility issues using the reminder and the checker. This offering helped Atos being recognized as a finalist for the 22 Microsoft Inclusion and Changemaker Partner of the Year award. My colleagues met in Paris to receive the award and to talk about continuing our innovation partnership. This brings value and business to the table, and we designers like the recognition too. For more dark mode tips and tricks, just ask.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Beatriz. And I think I am definitely looking at dark mode as a new era of a lack of light, looking at addressing light pollution, accessibility, and just an ease of ease on the eyes, which I think is incredibly important. We're going to jump straight into some questions, and two of you have the word design in your titles, and that's Phil from Miro and Katie from RNID. So I want you to throw the first question to you, and then we're going to come back a little bit to some of Beatriz's work. The question is this: how can we engage with designers at the earliest possible phase of a project? I have a belief that design can make every conversation, but it seems to be left out of accessibility quite often. Why is that, and how could we engage designers? So in no particular order, Katie or Phil, who wants to go first?
Kicking off the conversation. So just first of all, to introduce, so Miro is an online collaborative whiteboard that enables distributed teams to work effectively together. And so we understand that teams include people of lots of different backgrounds, experiences, and access needs. And so we want to give everybody an opportunity to collaborate. And I think if you look at traditional accessibility guidelines like WCAG, they don't cover things like complex use cases like whiteboard. So while that's a very important first step, we have to go way beyond any existing kind of WCAG guidelines in order to really create a product that's accessible and usable for everyone. So the question then, how does design, and what role does design have to play, and how do we introduce design as early as possible in the future? So for me, and this saying, like, nothing about us without us, is a really, really key to my career. So very early on, I conducted the first kind of user research studies at Google with people with visual impairments. And that was a really powerful experience in building empathy in the organization, but also giving kind of tangible kind of direction to the team. So for me, how do you build design in earlier in the process? You really need to build empathy within an organization. And the best way, the gold standard, in my opinion, is to involve people in your kind of design research activity. So look at, how do we, if you're running discovery, how do you involve people with disabilities and approach? And so that's one side of the story, ensure that you're building that empathy. But the other side is to look at the processes that you have within your organization. So for example, at Miro, we have an accessibility policy, and we have a product development life cycle where we define at each phase, key drivers for accessibility. So for example, when kicking off a project, it's really important to have non-functional requirements around accessibility. And then if we look at what we might call the design phase, to make sure that your designers are trained and have the knowledge and awareness in order to potentially annotate their designs to make sure that you capture any potential accessibility issues as early as possible in the process. So I think there's two parts. There's one, there's like the softer, build empathy and awareness within your organization, but secondly, make sure that you have those policies and processes really clearly defined so that people know how to follow and how to create these accessible experiences.
Absolutely, and maybe in some ways it kind of encapsulates both the carrot and the stick in terms of having the policies and having that empathic approach. Katie, you're a service designer, which is a relatively new discipline of design. Why aren't designers, clamoring to be part of the accessibility space, the accessibility sector? There's so much opportunity there. What's the gap in your mind? Is there a gap?
That's a good question. I think that sometimes accessibility can be seen by some people as a barrier to doing what they want to do. So I've worked on projects where people have an idea about how they want something to look, for example, and I have to come in and say, well, we can't do that because that's not going to be accessible. And I think sometimes there's this view that we're the ones who are saying you can't do that, and people don't want us telling them they can't do what they want to do. But I spend a lot of time trying to impress upon people that it doesn't really matter what something looks like if ultimately it means that people can't use it. And we need to be starting from a place where the first thing we're looking at is something that people can access. And are we going to be putting barriers in place by designing something the way that we want to design it? So yeah, I think we just need to kind of shift our mindsets, and so thinking about accessibility not as a barrier, but as something that can help us make our products and services better ultimately.
Yep, and I think that sort of leads on to the next question, which I really want to throw at Craig and James. Both of you work for brands, HSBC and Channel 4, and you may say a little bit more about what it is that you do there. But the question really is this, brands really form almost the first touch point design that many people have with a company or an organization or a system or a service. And how can we influence brand decisions which can then cascade into individual projects, individual touch points? And could we go to Craig first, just because you're looking at me, and then we'll go to James.
Of course. So in HSBC, we're actually very fortunate that the accessibility team do work very closely with the brand and design teams. We actually have quite a robust brand design portfolio and toolkits for everything we actually produce. Every organisation has made mistakes, and HSBC will be the same. But in the last 5 years, really, accessibility has been key to a lot of decisions that have been made. Katie has spoken about that the issues that people may have where people see accessibility as stymieing design. But the way we see it, that if people know what the requirements are, it's just an extra challenge for them. How can you actually create something that's going to be desirable, robust, visible, memorable, etc., but just within the minor constraints? And when we think about accessibility, the constraints of brand are visibility, perceivability, distinguishability, and our brand actual philosophy is we have colour schemes, we have design patterns, and those have actually been created to make sure that we'll cater to people who are colourblind, we'll cater to people who are neurodiverse, and this is embedded at every level, and it does help for us that chief sponsors. There's always going to be blockers in any process, but we've got Ewan Stevenson, who is our Group Chief Financial Officer. We've got Ian, who is our Group UK CEO. We've got our Chief Communications Officer, Steve John. When they hear about accessibility, it's not a question of, oh, this is going to impact us, we don't want to hear about this. It's how do we actually incorporate this? How can we be better? HSB just very, very fortunate that we've never had the pushback that I've had in other organisations, which is, why do we have to do this? The worst it ever gets is, we can't do too much too soon. Baby steps to get there. The senior support helps us, and our processes, as has been said, the actual robust governance processes in place to actually make sure that everything we do actually does meet our minimum requirements. How about Channel 4, Josh?
Channel 4 similar to HSBC in that we've got a real focus on accessibility. Obviously, we host the Paralympic coverage over the past few years, and that's been really key to accessibility. But I think the issue that like you say, if you've got something in place, you're in a business that already values accessibility, it's relatively easy to get those things right? Because you're putting processes in all the place, you've got exec sponsorship and all that sort of stuff. The difficulty comes where you're getting potentially new brand assets from a third party. So you've employed an agency to do this. At that, you've really got to be pushing back to the agency and saying, these are our requirements. You need to make sure that accessibility is at the heart of everything that you do when you are outsourcing things. And that includes when you're partnering with third-party delivery partners as well. You need to make sure that your non-functional requirements, as Phil was saying, include accessibility at the core of those, not as a tacked-on thing to be tested by QA, but by something that runs through the entire work stream from ideation to delivery. But like I say, Channel 4, we're known as an accessible broadcaster, and it's certainly core to everything that we do. There's a lot of accessibility activity here.
There's something that I think is really worth sort of picking up on, because Beatriz, your presentation really showed a sort of easy to understand, but it may be sort of difficult to implement. So and the question I had for you was, what are the low-hanging fruits of accessibilities that we could point and shoot creatives, designers at? Was dark mode one of those, or was it, or are there other things that you think that could be the easy wins that kind of signal the power of design within the accessibility conversations?
Thank you, Rama, for that question. That is a very interesting one. I think the best way to gain a designer's heart, like you mentioned before, is to show the user pains and gains. So to support the designers to do user research and usability tests with people with disabilities. That is the biggest win ever, because you will win their hearts. They will realize that their work makes a difference in real people. There's this is my first role as an accessibility expert. My previous roles were in UX and back then also a short escape into front-end development. So I know how important it is, these conversations, and to show that it matters what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just agreeing with you. Did you have something else to add there?
I wanted to refer to Kate's shift of mindset. Sorry, not shift left. Shift of mindset. So designers see sometimes accessibility as a barrier to their creativity. But the thing designers need to understand is that accessibility is just another constraint. The same way we have constraints with the screen size or the different devices we have, the network, the same way we have constraints with the brand guidelines or some other things we get from legislations and other rights, another type of things. It's a constraint. It's not a barrier. It's an opportunity to innovate. The more constraints you get, the more creative at the end you can get. And that is a big point that we don't learn in school when we learn about design or when we learned about product development.
Yes. And actually going back to that thing of learning, I want to throw a question out to all the panel, which is around user pains and gains, as you said. In the work that we do, and I have a design background myself, so I'm a bit of a design fundamentalist. That's my health warning for the panel. I have a great belief in design. But how do you communicate user pain and gain to design teams, to innovation teams? Because it's almost a little bit like a secret sauce. How do you get that in the hands of the people who are going to be creating the products and the services? Because quite often the research seems to be done by one group, then it's thrown over the wall to a marketing group or a research group who filter it into research, who then throw it into the design territory. And I'm not saying that is what happens in your company. In fact, I'm looking for the kind of secret routes and methods that you have to sort of shortcut those, again, design routes to accessibility. So looking at no one in particular, who wants to go first? If not, I'll pick on someone.
Yeah, I'll maybe just kick off.
Oh, go on then.
With following on from what Beatriz was talking about encouraging designers to run research with people with disabilities, and I think just to come back to that, for kind of building this kind of education and kind of convincing people that this is something that's really important. It's really, really difficult for anyone to watch someone struggle to use your product, and that can be a real motivator. For kind of opening up the conversation as to, okay, great, so accessibility is something I want to learn more. What do I do? And then it moves the conversation from awareness to actually tangible things that you can do to drive change. And so that's one thing. And sometimes it can be difficult to set that up, but nowadays there's much easier than it used to be to kind of set up and run these types of studies. There's lots of tools out there that can help you set up and run these types of studies. But another thing that we've done just to look for opportunities to even demonstrate how does assistive technology work. Can you set up like a breakfast kind of club? Can you set up a lunch and learn? Just to try and expose as much as possible people to really challenge assumptions that people have to how they're interacting with their product, because that's the big problem. People come with a mindset as to how their product is going to be used, and if you can just introduce and challenge those assumptions, then that can go a really long way to helping change in an organization.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's like a sliding scale of stuff that you can do. So at the top, the sort of most complex is setting up user testing with your product, and then sharing of that. I think below that, something that we did at Channel 4, we have like a learning at work week, and I ran some accessibility training during that, showing how things are difficult to use when you're using assistive technology. But one of the easiest and one of the most effective that I've used in conversations with stakeholders, I showed them a YouTube video of Addy, who's one of the guys at AbilityNet, because he did a YouTube of him booking flights, just to show that the way you use a computer, you use an app or a service, isn't how everybody does it, and there are barriers that you can't empathize with something you don't know about. You can't care about accessibility if you don't know it's an issue. So allowing people to empathize by showing them the impact of these things is really, really powerful, even if it is just watch this video, just to try and tweak their mindset slightly.
And one of the powers I've seen with showing videos is no one can argue with a video. Addy is an avid snowboarder as well. No one can argue with his experience, but I imagine, James, if you are turning around and saying, experiencing, people can question that. And quite often, in my own experience, we've won pitches or won projects or just won the ability to talk about accessibility in the boardroom, showing people having difficulties. So I think, Craig, I know I cut you off there.
No, it's fine. I just really wanted to emphasise something that was said there about the empathy, and it was something that was said at the beginning, because no one deliberately goes out to make an accessible product. People do not know what they do not know. And it's as simple as that. And if, at HSBC, we've got a multi-pronged approach that we run weekly training sessions with external parties, which is available to all our staff. We do lots of internal elements to actually just try and get the knowledge and awareness out, because it can't just be mandated from top down. It needs to be top down, bottom up, middle out. You need to get everybody on board with that approach. And we've used Addy as well. Having Addy come in, do a presentation is so much more impactful than, say, me talking for an hour. What Addy can show you in 5 minutes over what a good website, a good experience is compared to a bad experience, because that's what makes something, makes someone feel disabled, the bad experience they have. And no one deliberately went out to do that. But actually getting that empathy out there and actually getting the people to understand that. And it's just that knowledge. And once again, no one will deliberately make it an accessible product. People just do not know.
And I think that's such a powerful point. How do we get this knowledge flowing and going? So Katie and Beatriz, I'm loving this list of tips and tricks because I'm writing them down as well, and I'm sure the audience are. But Katie and Beatriz, going beyond Addy, it sounds like Addy is a recurring theme here. How do you get accessibility onto the front of mind of everyone that you're working with? What are your tips and tricks?
Katie?
It was something that we did recently at RNID. So we're a completely remote organization, but we get together in person a couple of times a year to have these staff events. And at the last staff event, I did a session about accessibility and trying to challenge people to think about accessibility beyond just hearing loss. So as an organization, we focus on supporting people who are deaf or have hearing loss. But I wanted to talk to staff about how we need to kind of think beyond just that, because we know from research that we've done that a lot of the people who we support don't just have hearing loss. So they may have sight loss as well, or motor impairments, or long-term health conditions. So we need to be thinking about how we can make things accessible for people kind of across the board. And having that staff session was really useful, generated a lot of really good discussion. And on the back of that, what we did was create some resources for our intranet that staff can access, because people were asking me, how can I be more accessible in my work? What can I do? So thinking about it beyond just something that the digital people do, but actually there are things that people can do in their every day-to-day work that will make things more accessible for the people we support, and then also for our colleagues as well. So that was something that we did that worked really well, is just getting people in a room and talking about it.
Yep, thank you. And that speaks to the kind of collegiate education, if you like. It's not just clients and customers. Beatriz, over to you.
I love several points that Katie brought up, like intersectionality and how to include access to your workflow. So something I do, back to your question, Ram, is I use design thinking against designers and against high-level leadership in my company. So I go to the egoistical way. So there's people are sometimes attached to doing personas, and they find it hard to do accessibility personas. So the way I do it is I talk about the bell curve, and that we all design for the average, and then on the edges we have people that we're missing. Because if you all design to the 32-year-old guy, university studies, wife, 2 kids, and typical good money maker, then you're forgetting certain points. So you have power users on the one side. For example, call center agents, they all work on the keyboard because they're paid by the second. So every second they save, and moving the mouse from A to B takes longer than tabbing with the keyboard. Cost the company money. So those are people who benefit from the same things that a person with a motor disability or a people who use a screen reader use. So you can design for the extremes, and then you will be able to create more innovations. And that way you can support it. I create a proto persona with a car, because I used to work with a lot of car manufacturers when I was working as a designer. And I always got the phrase, yeah, but blind people don't drive cars. So then I got so tired of hearing that I turned it back into a talk. I go outside talking about that all car drivers are blind. Because if you're looking at the street, you cannot look at a device. You cannot look at the monitor that you have installed in your car. You're also dexterity impaired. You need big touch area so that you don't miss and create an accident because you have to move your wheel. You cannot reach anything on the back of your seat. So you are also motor impaired. So you have also a cognitive impairment, because maybe you're in the third construction road area behind a slow truck, and somebody crossed the lane without blinking.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of things that you have, and everyone can relate to this driving a car thing. Maybe they cannot relate to a permanent disability, and I always bring out also Microsoft Inclusive Design Guidelines with the permanent, temporary, and situational scenarios, so that people can relate and make it egoistically. And I talk about, if you get lucky, you're going to be disabled when you get older. You will see worse, you will hear worse. So if you prepare now for the future, you will be able to use all the cool stuff that you're doing now. You will be able to use it in the future.
Yeah, and building on that car theme, one of the projects we did was looking at autonomous vehicles, and we were asked by the UK government who would make the great first adopters. And we did a year's worth of research, and the answer came out 2 groups. One was people who transport goods and services, and the other was visually impaired people. And we did a lot of work with low vision communities, who were eager to drive or to be in charge of a vehicle, to actually have that ownership, that space ownership. So it leads on to a next question for the group.
And I want to do a short interrupt there, because what you mentioned, in Spain, blind people get money from the government to buy cars. So I have some blind colleagues who own all the cars of their families. So they actually want to decide how the car feels like. They go to the car dealer shop and they sit and they feel and they want to do a test drive, and at the end they take the decision because it's their money who's going to buy for the car, even if they're not going to drive it. So that is a to do with the autonomous vehicles.
Yes.
Thank you.
And actually, you learn so much in this world of accessibility. I was at a conference called Inclusive Africa earlier this year and met the world's first fully blind car reviewer. He's called Julius Mbura, and his YouTube channel is Julio Supercharge. I'm not paid to say that, but it's just incredible to look at what he brings in terms of sensibility, haptics, touch, to vehicle design. And I actually, have this dream of bringing him in to talk to some of the car manufacturers. And the question for the panel is, I have this belief that in design and innovation, people with disabilities can actually push the boundaries of what is possible, what is needed within almost any design. Process or situation or service. But the challenge is, and I think, Katie, this harkens back to something you were saying, sometimes different disabilities may sort of compete or conflict with each other. So on the one hand, if you get it right for people with disabilities, as Ford did for the Ford Focus, and they just made the easiest car to drive at that time in the world, knocked Toyota off the top spot. So that's a benefit, but how do you negotiate this shared space of disabilities? What kind of conflicts and convergences might you have come across as a panel when you're creating a product? What disabilities might run up against each other, for example?
Well, one of the most common ones for that is obviously once you hit the neurodiverse space. The neurodivergence is such a large spectrum, and what works for one user group fundamentally does not work for another. And actually trying to come up with a set of standards or something that's going to work for everybody is almost impossible. So it's fine for me, it's fine to actually go for a best fit, but also actually knowing that it is only a best fit, but actually looking to have customization options in there that allow a user to define their own story, their own journey. And it's something that obviously HSBC we're looking into. But yeah, that neurodivergent space is really the biggest growing frontier where we're finding that discrepancy.
A really good point. What have others felt speaking to that or to your own experience?
I echo what Greg said. It's so difficult to. There is no one size fits all solution, unfortunately. So yeah, we're also looking into like an accessibility control panel sort of thing, so you can tailor your experiences on our things. Allowing people to set it up to suit them better earlier in the journey as well, so you're not having to set it, thing as you're using something else.
I think it's.
I was just going to say, I will say that over the last few years, the other big area we've actually moved into is, rather than someone like myself saying this is what it means to be accessible, because I will have my own interpretation of standards, is going back to the user research. It's actually getting that live user feedback over what works for them. Almost every major project we do, we actually have a user research session, and we get third parties in to actually do that for us to, how can this be a better experience for everybody? Rather than saying it may be technically accessible, but how can this be better? But back up to you, Phil. So.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of align with that, just to say that you can just be very, very cautious that you don't go too far with personalization, because I think, back maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was a trend to create a completely different experience that was quote unquote accessible. And, then, lots of different experiences and lots of information was left off. And so then it actually led to a worse experience overall. But I think there are certain things that you can do to a certain extent to personalize the experience. And one approach that we've taken is to really look at, what are some of the device settings that users have. So, for example, Apple have done a really good job with providing users the ability to reduce motion. And then you can pick that up as a CSS property, and you can build that into your product so that you can then tailor the experience, maybe removing animations or else. So that's an area that we've explored at Miro. And so as you dig into it a little bit deeper, there's like 50 million people have some kind of vestibular disorder in the US alone. And so just by considering the needs of that audience specifically, then you can really create a really great experience. And then what we find by providing that as an option within our interface, there's lots of other people that maybe didn't have vestibular disorders that find this to be really useful and a really engaging feature. So that's a great example of like a feature that we built for a certain use group, but it ended up benefiting everyone. And I think the background colors are a great example of where you can look at the system settings and reflect those to ensure that you tailor the experience. So I was at Spotify previously, and we had a dark background, and it was fixed, and that created a lot of problems for people with astigmatism, especially, who find it hard to read that text. It's definitely a really important consideration.
That is a great point, Phil. I wanted to mention the preference. So you always need to respect the preference of the user. And these CSS media queries is something I wanted to mention too. So there's media queries for dark mode, there's media queries for high contrast, and there's some other media queries for reduced contrast, and there's new media queries coming around in order to respect these accessibility settings that everyone has in their systems. And people are used to these accessibility settings being respected in the native applications or the operating systems, and then they get to products, websites, or apps that don't respect those things, like the font size, and you need to be very careful. So it's always in design, you always talk about guided choice. You don't want to let all the users choosing everything, because that would also be overwhelming. So you want to guide them and mostly don't enforce anything on them so that they can have their choice in deciding how they want to access your content. That is a great point.
And Katie, didn't want to leave you out. Anything to add here?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, in my experience, while there may be cases where people with different disabilities have different needs or preferences in terms of how they access your website or service, I found that certainly more cases where when we're solving accessibility issues for one group, that it's having benefits for other groups as well, which is something that kind of Phil had talked about as well. So in things like, for example, at RNID, we support people who may have British Sign Language as their first language. So we try to ensure that any content that we're designing for our digital services is in plain English. But that doesn't just benefit those sign language users. That's something that benefits anyone with English as a second language, or people who may have a learning disability or be neurodiverse. So I find that actually times by following kind of good accessible practice, you're solving things for multiple groups of people at the same time.
I think there is the very heart of inclusive design. That, if you have certain groups as pathfinders, you can extrapolate that outwards. And I realize, sometimes when we do accessibility and inclusive design panels, we can talk about all the challenges that are out there. And I don't want to depress everyone on a Thursday afternoon. So I actually wanted to just go around the room again and ask you a question, which is around joy. Have you seen a product or a service that you believe everyone in the TechShare Pro audience should know about that has actually brought joy to yourself or to someone in the accessibility community? Have you seen something that delights and surprises, that is a good example of something you believe we should all know about? And I've got my pen at the ready. I'm going to be making notes here. So again, who wants to go first? Or do you need a moment to think about? Oh, Beatriz.
I'm thinking about, I need to find the name and I will post it in Twitter. So there is this sign language interpreter in Germany who interprets the songs in sign language with not just writing, sorry, that was German, not just only interpretation of translation from German to sign to language in German, but also he does the movements and he has sound as a background behind him. So people can also see the wave sound as long as he interprets the songs. And I think that is a great thing. And there's also another interpreter in Spain, Rosalind. She's got a sign interpreter, Beatriz, who always goes with her on tour, and she's part of the core team. She's not hidden and she's not in a second row. She's in the stage, and she's it's like if they were a duo. So they have also the video clips and everything. Everything has by default, and I think that it's a new experience that brings some more value to the table. There were also some discos doing as deaf music, so you would get vibration vests, and you would not hear. You would feel the music. So there is another type of experience in the music and the party scene.
Fantastic. So that's number one. Do we have other offers?
I was going to say, I really like those examples, particularly working for the sort of organization that I work for. And I've heard of other similar things as well, of people who are sign language users saying that they've gone to a concert or they've gone to a football match and there was a sign language interpreter there, and how much that meant to them to be able to access that information, you know, and get the same information as everyone else, and how important that was, and that really brings a lot of joy to people.
Yep. So that's number two. And do we want to carry on with this? Or if not, I can jump into questions from the audience. We've got some great questions.
I'll just take a third example. And
yeah.
Don't mean to sound so self-serving for HSBC, but we recently launched something internally, the Inclusion Hub, and it's all about obviously encouraging people and awareness of accessibility. And it includes all the customization features for dyslexics, for the motion, etc. But what really makes this stand out is it's a video story of someone doing online dating, and she's an MS sufferer. And the actual including the message just comes across so much more powerfully. And once again, it's that ADDI syndrome of someone who with the disability telling your story and actually building the empathy, and actually having that as a central hub, actually having the production value behind it, and actually being able to show a narrative over, especially if it's something like MS, where the symptoms can change so daily or hourly, how it actually impacts somebody's health. Just to actually, once again, I'm just always going to come back to that. Because when people empathize with something, they're more likely to be willing to make change.
And I love the word empathy because I think it's really at the heart of inclusive design. So we have our first question for the panel from Mark, saying, interested to know how many people have an accessibility policy in place in their organization. Are you happy to share? That's almost a sort of thumbs up or a hands up, but does anyone want to come in on that? What does your accessibility policy look like? What does it cover?
Okay. In HSBC, we've got obviously a firm, a functional instruction manual, and it basically states that everything we release in the retail space and the wholesale space, and now as of this year in the internal space, must actually meet WCAG 2.1 standards. And that is our baseline for accessibility. And we need to make sure that our policy is, we don't confirm ourselves that these elements are accessible. These are confirmed by third parties. So it gives us our base level, and it states that we don't mark our own homework.
Absolutely, and we'll open it up onto the screen, panel on the screen, but I also wanted to add a little bit of how much of your your accessibility policy may cover people like contractors or subcontractors, especially in the design and innovation field. Does your policy kind of extend beyond employees and the internal staff? Can anyone speak to that?
Certainly, we've got non-functional requirements with our development partners that say that everything they create is going to be WCAG 2.1 AA. And I think our accessibility policy is, everyone, because we're public service broadcaster, it's got to be accessible to the widest number of people, regardless of ability or capability or the technology that they're on, certainly. It's really important that our delivery partners, whether they be through design or through delivery, understand how important it is for our products to be seen to be accessible and to be accessible.
Yeah.
And I think we do partner with an external company to mark, so we're not marking our own work.
Yeah, I would just plus one to that for Miro. We have a accessibility policy that we adhere to. WCAG, 2.1 AA, and we've had that independently audited. And I think for us the challenge is like a lot of WCAG doesn't apply to a whiteboard. Like, and the feedback we get is add an alt attribute to the canvas element, and like obviously that doesn't work. So we want to go way beyond a policy to look at actual usability, and then the question is how do you build that into a policy? We can apply the principles of WCAG, but in terms of measuring us against WCAG itself is extremely difficult.
Yeah, and I love that idea of policy as a baseline. It's a very necessary framework, but going beyond policy is also an aspiration. And there's a question here that I think is potentially directed at Katie, which is, inclusive design. We used to say, one size fits all, and then it sort of went to one size fits one. The idea of choice. And the question here is looking particularly at website/apps, providing personalization options versus deferring to the operating system/browser accessibility setting. So what is your opinion on that sort of personalization versus kind of global oversight?
Yeah, that's a really tricky question. I think we kind of need to consider both in a way, because we know that people will be using their own devices and may have their certain setups on their devices that they want to use, and obviously we don't want anything that we design to kind of get in the way of that. But at the same time, I suppose we want to kind of allow people choice as well. I think it's a really tricky one to kind of get that balance right.
Yeah. And I think it is a tricky question, and you could probably run a seminar on that or a research centre on that, but that's why I threw it at you. Does anyone else have anything to say on that? Personalisation
Hi, Rama, yes.
options? Yes, please go ahead.
I wanted to go one step back about the policy, because the example that I showed before is the direct impact of our full ecosystem accessibility, but we also have two other lines. So we have the indirect impact, and that is the impact from purchase resources, products and services. So we buy accessible. We have worked with our procurement, like James mentioned before, so that every contract that we sign has an accessibility clause on it. And we also work on the extra influence. So those vendors who are not accessible, we're working with them, we're supporting them to become accessible so that we have an impact on the whole ecosystem outside of Atos. So one of the examples, I'm going to do next week a presentation with FlowSparks. They have done our mandatory trainings platform for learning. And it was not accessible, but we've worked together with them as accessibility experts in order to make their platform accessible. So in this way, it's not just a benefit from us, but for the whole community outside of Atos too. So that is the part of the influence that we have embedded in our accessibility program.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I'm just looking at the stream here. We have a useful factoid here, which says that 80% of people who use captioning are not actually deaf. And I do know that in my family, when we sit in front of the TV and eat popcorn or have a TV dinner, the noise of chewing can, drown out even the most vibrant action movie. So, I think we're part of that statistic. We have a very important question here from Leslie, who says, any advice for those not in leadership positions to get buy-in from senior management who are reluctant to allocate resources to accessibility and inclusion? And my God, I think almost everyone has been in that position. So who wants to come in on that?
My advice would be to get in contact with like-minded people in your company. Sorry, you are not alone. So get a group, get some more encouragement, and then try to present a case where you can bring business value, not just, of course, we can come with the law. If you need some extra hammer, you can use the European Accessibility Act 2 years from now, and all private companies are mandated by it. So maybe if you work with finance sector, with broadcasting, I see James is responding to that, because it does not only affect EU countries now that Brexit is out there. It affects everyone who wants to sell service or products within the EU. It's like an ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, but for the whole European countries. So it's a huge business market. And there are some countries, I think New Zealand wanted to adopt it too, and Norway is already all in board. So if the innovation part, the good reasons don't work, you can always use the law to your advantage.
Mine, I've been in this situation many times at different places I've worked, where I've been certainly not the sole voice of accessibility championship, but certainly far from the top, being able to make budgetary requests and things like that. And my advice would be absolutely shout out, make as much noise as you can about it, try and get some allies together, but also sneak it in. Just sneak it in when you can.
Yes.
If you're a designer, just design things accessibly. If you're a developer and it's not in your requirements and you know what you're doing, then just put it in. Just put it in.
Yeah.
Easy.
Been there, done that.
Yeah.
I love that, by the way.
But also as well, it's, the cost of creating an inaccessible product is the same as the cost of creating an accessible product. So sneaking it in, it is great. Getting like-minded people together is great. The law, is the stick. And the carrot is the research you can potentially, a happier customer, loyal customer. There's duty of care for your internal staff, and happy staff are committed staff, and you've got better retention. And, there's so many different to this. You could actually show the benefit and the return on investment. But if in doubt, you've got the stick of the law.
Yeah. I mean, like you say, it is, if you do them both at the same time. So, if you start out intending to build an inaccessible product and you start out intending to build an accessible product, it probably will cost you the same. If you build an inaccessible product and then want it to be accessible, it will cost you a lot more. Accessible outcomes are expensive if you are doing them after the fact. Retrofitting it is expensive. So yeah, that's another one. It'll cost you more if you don't get it right.
I've always worked by the rule of 10 on that one. If you pick up something in test, it's more expensive than if you picked up in dev, which is 10 times more expensive than if you picked up in design. And never mind that the old approach for accessibility was, we'll do it in user acceptance testing. We'll fix it all then. You can. You're not going to want to pay for it.
That is the NASA did a great research on that. So it's not at the end, if you don't catch it in the requirements phase, it can be up to 1,000 times more expensive. Every dollar, euro, pound that you invest at the beginning counts. And I don't know, you're all UX people, so I've been through the UX, the same process. So at the beginning it was, no, just do the colors, UX is out of the box. And I had to go through it and talk to the sales colleagues to make them understand that this is a business. In order to be able to do my job at the end. And with accessibility, it's the same. It's more than just the colors or the contrast in case of designs. There's a lot more behind, and there is a lot of return of investment if you do it right from the beginning.
Yeah. So we have just about a minute left of the panel, and I think this is a great sort of question to end on. We have allyship, don't be a lone wolf, be a pack wolf. We have retrofitting is expensive, and the final two panelists, do you have words of wisdom, 30 seconds each, just to put you on the spot? Really want to end with these kind of tips and tricks.
Yeah, I suppose another thing I would throw in there is just getting senior people to observe user research, which is something I know we've alluded to earlier. I think it's really powerful to just see people using your products and services. And I have seen that when we get senior leaders to observe user research sessions, that it does really have an impact on how important they see accessibility, because they can see people actually struggling.
I love that. I've used that one a lot. So, you know, I gets my 5 gold stars as well. Finally.
Yes, so what I think is like absolutely try and find allies. There's always other people that are interested and engaged with accessibility that you can ally with. But the final point is just really look for evidence that will really help support your case for accessibility. The amount of people that are impacted by a lack of accessibility means if your product or service hasn't been considered accessibility, it should be quite straightforward to kind of find, you know, kind of through user research, through engaging with your customer support team, through, I don't know, Twitter or Reddit or other forums. There will definitely be feedback that you could then take and use that as evidence to drive the case for accessibility.
So
I would like to add, sorry.
Oh yes, very, very quickly. We're just a little bit over time. So very quickly,
talk the
Beatriz.
language of your audience. If you're talking to C-level, use spreadsheets. You're a user experience person, so you need to know the audience speaks.
And that is a really important point to end on. That is kind of inclusive design at the heart. So I think I want to thank all the panelists. It's been an incredibly intelligent and informed panel. Emotionally intelligent, intellectually intelligent, and I think accessibly intelligent as well. So thank you all. More to come from TechShare Pro. Thank you all, and thank you to the audience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.